The world is once again standing on a knife's edge, caught between the ambitions of authoritarian rulers and the fragile promises of democratic nations. It began with a chilling date etched into history, February 24, 2022, when Vladimir Putin launched his full-scale assault on Ukraine. The images of tanks rolling across borders, drones hammering civilian neighborhoods, and hospitals reduced to rubble shook the very foundations of global security. Only months later, Iranian-backed forces struck Israel, adding fuel to an already volatile Middle East. And hovering over it all, the Chinese Communist Party sharpened its focus on Taiwan, daring the West to draw a line it might not be able to hold.
The son of a flying tiger who helped liberate China, as the father of 4 sons who have served in Iraq, Egypt, Italy, and Afghanistan, as a 31-year Army veteran myself. Your leadership for peace through strength is crucial, and I believe we're in a Cold War we did not choose of dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. It began with war criminal Putin invading Ukraine on February 24, 2022, and then Iranian puppets invading Israel on October 7, 2023, with the Chinese Communist Party threatening Taiwan. President Trump tried to deter war criminal Putin in his first term with Javelin missiles to Ukraine, American troops in Poland, and stopping Nord Stream 2. But Putin ignored Trump, and defying Biden has continued his efforts. Upon election of Trump, there were hopes for peace, but Putin insulted Trump with the murderous attacks at Christmas and New Year's. Every time President Trump tries to reduce the conflict, war criminal Putin increases mass murder of drones and missile attacks on the people and civilians of Ukraine, including hospitals this week. War criminal Putin is clearly fixated to resurrect the failed Soviet Union, with troops still in Transnistria, Moldova, rigging elections in Belarus, invading the Republic of Georgia, and rigging elections against the legitimate President Salome Zurishvili of Georgia. Additionally, there have been new threats this week against the Baltic republics, our NATO allies. Every outreach by Trump has been mocked by Putin. With that in mind, an incredible achievement of President Trump is to awaken our NATO allies, now including Sweden and Finland, that with Germany pledging now 5% remarkably, and 17 of our allies now provide a larger GDP support for the people of Ukraine than the United States because of President Trump's encouragement. What is the latest status on encouraging our NATO allies of providing for peace through strength?
Thank you for the question, sir. The one thing I would take issue with is the characterization that Vladimir Putin ignored President Trump. I think Vladimir Putin paid a lot of attention to President Trump in his first term, and that's why the invasion did not happen under President Trump's watch. Instead, under the weakness and perceived weakness of Joe Biden.
Ignored and proceeded to
He paid attention under President Trump, and then when Joe Biden was in the office
it really set the stage, sadly, that if he had really appreciated what President Trump was trying to do, he wouldn't have invaded again, but whether Biden's president or not.
But to your question about Europe,
yes,
President Trump has invigorated a truly historic investment amongst NATO allies to shoulder the burden of the defense of the continent of Europe. Vladimir Putin saw what he believed to be weakness, and I believe President Trump has stood up to that by reminding our allies that they need to spend on their own defense and ensure that they're able to shoulder the burden to defend the continent. That's been a good development.
And indeed, I was grateful last February coming back from the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe and meeting with the President, and I told him how exciting it was to see our allies understand that indeed he supports Ukraine, he supports NATO and peace through strength. And General Kane, I particularly appreciate your VMI credentials of professionalism, and with that in mind, we understand that even today, the International Atomic Energy Agency has declared Iran in breach of non-proliferation agreements, and what are we doing to deter the aggression coming from Iran?
Well, sir, first, I noticed in your bio that you went to that other school in Lexington. which is always hard for me to get my head around, sir.
Hey, I grew up in the holy city of Charleston. When I saw Vimis, I thought they were Citadel cadets.
Yes, sir. I'm now a joint guy, so I'll keep all those comments to myself, sir.
You're here.
Sir, throughout, the IAEA report is certainly troubling. The international community seems to be thinking about what they're going to do about it, and as are we, watching the situation develop and carefully monitoring the report.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, now
America's in good hands with
gentleman
your
from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
These are not isolated crises, they are pieces of a larger pattern, dictators testing the strength of democracies, probing for weakness and calculating whether America still has the resolve to lead. The question isn't just about borders, it's about whether freedom itself can withstand the relentless march of tyranny. Representative Joe Wilson wasted no time in setting the tone. He praised America's commitment to peace through strength, pointing to how NATO allies have begun pledging unprecedented levels of financial and military support for Ukraine. Nations once hesitant, like Germany and Sweden, are now committing historic percentages of their GDP to the defense of Europe. Wilson cast this as a victory for American leadership, an awakening of the alliance in the face of Vladimir Putin's brutality. He drew sharp moral lines, branding Putin a war criminal responsible for mass killings of civilians, drone strikes on hospitals and missile attacks designed to terrorize rather than conquer. Yet beneath the praise lies a harder truth. While allies may be spending more, Putin continues to expand his playbook, meddling in elections, propping up dictators and threatening the Baltic states. Wilson's words highlight the paradox of modern deterrence. America is applauded for rallying allies, but the aggressor he condemns has not slowed down. The debate in Washington has grown into a clash of two very different narratives. On one side are those who argue that unpredictability and tough rhetoric once kept adversaries like Vladimir Putin in check. They claim hesitation and weakness only invite aggression, and that boldness, no matter how unconventional, projects deterrence. On the other side stand critics who see the same period as one of confusion, where authoritarian leaders learn to exploit mixed signals and blurred red lines. They argue that admiration for strongman leadership sent the wrong message, emboldening rulers who thrive on chaos and intimidation. Both camps look at the same events: election interference, hybrid warfare, and military buildups, and reach opposite conclusions. Was Putin frozen in fear or encouraged to push further? This divide reveals more than a policy disagreement. It exposes a struggle over how America defines power itself. And as global conflicts escalate, that question isn't abstract. It determines whether the next crisis can be contained or allowed to explode. One of the most striking outcomes of recent years has been the dramatic shift inside NATO. For decades, the United States carried the lion's share of the alliance's defense spending, while many European nations contributed far below their commitments. That balance has now changed. Countries like Germany, long criticized for hesitancy, have pledged a record 5% of their GDP to defense. Sweden and Finland, once outside the NATO umbrella, have joined and immediately increased military contributions. 17 allies now provide more collective support for Ukraine than Washington itself, a reversal few thought possible. Supporters hail this as proof that Europe is finally stepping up, breaking its dependency on American taxpayers. But critics caution that this wasn't born from unity, it was born from fear. Allies acted because they felt squeezed, not necessarily because they embraced a shared vision of security. The question lingers: does a partnership built on pressure truly strengthen the alliance, or does it expose NATO's fragility when trust is already under strain? Even as NATO nations recalibrated their defenses, Vladimir Putin showed no sign of retreat. His ambition stretched far beyond Ukraine. In Moldova, Russian troops remain entrenched in Transnistria, a frozen conflict that Moscow continues to manipulate. In Georgia, elections have been rigged and opposition movements suppressed, undermining the country's fragile democracy. Belarus has become little more than a puppet state, its elections stolen and its sovereignty bent to Kremlin control. Most alarming of all, fresh threats have been leveled against the Baltic republics, nations that are not just neighbors but full NATO allies. These moves reveal a strategy bigger than any single battlefield. Putin's goal is not just to reclaim old Soviet territories, it is to erode confidence in the West's ability to respond. By attacking through drones, disinformation, and proxy forces, he tests every crack in the democratic order. Wilson's labeling of him as a war criminal captures the brutality, but the challenge goes deeper. Putin is rewriting the rules of conflict while the world struggles to keep pace. As the world grapples with Putin's aggression, another storm has been quietly gathering in the Middle East. A new report from the International Atomic Energy Agency declared that Iran is once again in breach of non-proliferation agreements, fueling fears that its nuclear ambitions are edging closer to reality. Representative Joe Wilson seized on this point, warning that American deterrence cannot afford to falter when Tehran continues to test red lines. Iran's strategy has long been a mix of delay, denial, and deception, stalling talks while advancing its programs in secret. Each breach, each violation, sends the same message: the regime believes the international community lacks the resolve to stop it. For Republicans in particular, the question is not just about compliance on paper, but about America's willingness to project strength in a region where credibility has already been shaken. The danger is clear. If Iran feels unchecked, the consequences will not be limited to treaties or inspections. They could spark a regional conflict with devastating reach. Beneath all the debates about Ukraine, NATO, and Iran lies a single haunting question: does America still project credible power on the world stage? Supporters of the current strategy argue that forcing allies to spend more has finally broken a decades-long imbalance. They see this as proof that American leadership still has weight, capable of moving entire continents toward action. Critics, however, argue that this leverage came at a cost. They warn that pressuring allies without building trust has created a brittle alliance, one that appears unified on paper but is fractured beneath the surface. Meanwhile, adversaries like Putin and Tehran exploit every delay, every hesitation to push their agendas further. This isn't just about military might or economic influence, it's about perception. If rivals believe America lacks resolve, then every red line becomes negotiable. The question isn't whether America's strong, it's whether that strength is seen as reliable. In geopolitics, credibility can mean the difference between deterrence and disaster. When all the arguments are stripped down, the picture that remains is one of paradox. America's allies are spending more, NATO is expanding, and military aid is flowing at levels never seen before. Yet, at the very same time, authoritarian leaders are advancing with renewed boldness, striking civilians, rewriting borders, and daring the West to respond. Representative Joe Wilson's moral clarity in condemning Vladimir Putin captures the outrage, but it cannot mask the deeper uncertainty. Can deterrence still work in an era where aggression has become routine? Can pressure alone rebuild trust among allies who fear coercion as much as they fear the Kremlin? These are the questions that now haunt Washington. The wars in Ukraine, the nuclear brinkmanship in Iran, and the looming threat over Taiwan all point to the same crossroads: either America redefines how it leads, or it risks being defined by the chaos unfolding around it. The stakes are no longer theoretical, they are global, immediate, and impossible to ignore. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with your take, and stay tuned. The next story will be even more explosive.